I'm going to attempt to talk about something that's probably even more controversial than marriage, and that is religion or theology. Now, I may really regret this later, but I do think that it's important. And it's an important discussion to have. And although it's so controversial, it's likely to immediately get most people or many people to identify me as outside of their tribe, and then immediately their brains will be at work to identify me as a bad person. There's this really strange effect that happens that way. It doesn't really matter what information is presented, but rather what's important is whether the person is perceived to be part of your tribe or not part of your tribe. And so what I say on this subject, some people will immediately identify me as not part of their tribe and therefore work to actively discredit whatever I'm saying or disagree with what I'm saying, and then identify me as bad or evil. And that's not my goal here, obviously. My goal is to try and offer some ideas that may be helpful to people who are dealing with existential crisis. Now, I'm doing this as a YouTube video only, not as a TikTok. And the reason for this is because TikTok does not have enough time for me to discuss this subject adequately, but YouTube does. So, also, I'm probably going to hum and haw a lot because I'm not going to stop the video all the time. Just going to keep it going for the most part. So, the first issue that I have here is that in the world today, a lot of the structures that we have in place that allow us to evaluate the world that we live in are falling apart. I feel like universities are falling apart. I think that journalism or the media is falling apart. And a lot of people are just picking up random bits of things here and there, and people are getting really confused. And there's also seems to be a fight going on, and the fight in many people's minds is occurring between science and religion. And and basically people in many instances feel as if they have to either choose science or they have to choose religion. And and this gives a lot of people existential crises where they don't know what their point for existing is anymore. And I, of course, am a human, and therefore I've been exposed to a lot of this challenge. And I also am battling myself, just like many of you, between these two worlds. I try to be very, very honest, and I also try to know what's true as best as I can. And so this whole process has been one that's been ongoing for me for decades. And in the process of studying these things, I've I've read books like Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is some might call it maybe the atheist's Bible, although I don't really actually agree with that title. Um, Whereas I've also read books like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and the Tao Te Ching and the Dhammapada and the Bible and the Quran and many, 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 many others. And in all of this searching, I've been trying to figure out what's true, or at least trying to figure out what the debate is about and try to find a happy place to fit in all of this. So I'll talk about some of my thoughts and some of my conclusions and why I've gotten there. And maybe some of these will be helpful to people. And maybe other people will immediately identify me as a bad person because of some of my current thoughts. I try to be a good person the best I can. So here's what I've seen going on. I see a lot of different religions, and I feel like a lot of the religions say we're good because we belong to this religion, and other people are bad because they don't belong to this religion, and it's us against them. And the same thing occurs with atheism. I think in some ways you could consider atheism a religion. I know all the atheists are going to really stick their thumbs down on that one, but I mean a set of beliefs with a group of people who have similar beliefs about the origin of the universe, whatever. So there's a lot of this fighting going on, and it is in many cases where people believe things because of logical fallacies rather than because they've done a lot of studying out there of different viewpoints. So when I say logical fallacies, I'm referring to two, and hopefully I state these correctly. One of them is appeal to authority, and the other one is appeal to the masses. And so with appeal to authority, basically we're saying, well, this is true because so-and-so said it was true, and that's why I believe it. And in many cases, this manifests to people in two ways. With the religious people, it manifests in the form of, well, this is what my pastor said, this is what my teacher said, whatever it is, whatever religion you have, this is what the yogi said, this is what the monk said, and therefore, because they're really spiritual, it must be correct. Or sometimes it works as a thing of the scriptures, like, well, it's written down in this book, and this book is perfect or near perfect, and therefore, it's true. And my interpretation of it is true, and the language is written in is perfect, and it cannot be misunderstood in any way, which is often the way many people take it. And that is an appeal to authority. And I consider that to be a logical fallacy, because it is. So it doesn't mean it's always a bad thing, and it also doesn't mean that you're automatically wrong if you appeal to authority. You could actually be appealing to authority, and you could be completely 100% right. So on the other spectrum, this occurs in people in the field of science, people that have not had any sort of spiritual experience or studying in theology or any of this sort of thing, but such and such atheist or such and such scientist said this thing, and because they're a scientist, because they must be right, because they're an atheist and they're respected and they have this degree in education, therefore they must be right. And when really they're making conjecture, excuse me. It's a theory. So but they're a smart person. They said it, therefore it must be true. So this is something that is going on both sides for sure. And who's right? How do you know what's right? Well, most people haven't even looked at the opposing sides. They haven't even read or listened to the people on the other perspective, except for with the intent to prove them as wrong. That's the only reason why I look at something. Well, I'll look at it for a second. Oh yeah, they're wrong. And it becomes this very much a reject it without even considering, the possibility that might be true. And then always assuming that God is always on our side if there is a theology, involved there, saying, well, I'm right and God's happy with us, and therefore he's angry at everybody else, and so he's going to burn everybody else or kill everybody else or whatever else, So anyway, I don't think this is a very good approach to studying theology. With this approach, if you were born atheist, you'd remain atheist. If you were born Catholic, you'd remain Catholic, or Buddhist, you remain Buddhist, or Hindu, you remain Hindu. Whatever religion you're born in, you'll stay in because it's your tribe, and the people in your tribe are, the authorities, and they're saying these things, and therefore other people are wrong. And the other one, of course, is appeal to the masses. This is the other logical fallacy that I see occurring, where people basically, well, everybody else I'm around, I go to college and all the other college students believe this, and therefore this must be true, this must be accurate. And I don't think that's very good either. Usually it's the exact kind of thing just because everyone believes it. Now it could be everybody believes it because it's right. Now that's a possibility. It doesn't mean just because you're using a logical fallacy that your conclusion is incorrect. It just means that the way that you got there is not logical. It doesn't. It's not a reasonable way to get there. So sometimes, though, it is pragmatic, which actually kind of gets me to the next part here. So, and this is science, the idea of science. So one of the big things that I mentioned a moment ago is that basically we see people who feel like they either have to have their religion or they have to have their science, and they can't have both. And let's face it, there is certainly a lot more objective evidence available for science than there is for theology. And because of that, a lot of people are like, well, therefore, theology is wrong and science is right. But what I would like to propose is that um, these two things, science and theology, don't actually have to contradict each other. Now, there are some instances where someone's religious beliefs are incompatible with what we are seeing objectively in the using the scientific method. And in those cases, people say, well, therefore the scientists must be wrong. And anytime someone says, well, what if they're not wrong? What if someone made a mistake thousands of years ago? What if the authority figures are not always perfect? What if the language has messed things up? What if the way we're interpreting this is incorrect? And every time someone suggests that, they say, well, no, you're automatic. If you even suggest that, you just don't have enough faith, and therefore you're a bad person, and whatever. And I think that is almost like a let's find the witch kind of game, and I don't think it actually helps us get closer to truth. I think that in cases where we have pretty well-founded objective scientific studies, we're using the scientific method, we're looking at all the different possibilities, and it's looking like things are a certain way. If we're rejecting that, we better have a really good reason to reject it. And I think using an appeal to authority, if you can hear my children outside, I apologize for the noise. But anyway, if you are rejecting science, hopefully you've got a really good reason for that. And I don't think appeal to authority is a good enough reason for that. And saying, well, you just have to have faith, you just have to have trust. Well, I'm a big proponent of faith and I'm a big proponent of trust, but we got to make sure that we're not using that word as a reason to close our eyes and stick our heads in the sand, that we're actually keeping an open eye. Because remember, if you go on that, then whatever religion or position you started in is the ones you're going to keep. You just have to have faith in that. So if you're born a Hindu, you stay a Hindu. If you're a Christian, you'll stay a Christian. If you're, whatever you're at, you're going to stay there because you've got to have faith and trust this and reject everything else. So this isn't a good process for coming to truth. Okay, just saying, well, just trust whatever you've been told by whatever authority figure you have. Well, if everybody does that, no one's ever going to get there. Okay, no one's ever going to arrive to whatever truth is, unless they happen to be lucky enough to be born to it, which seems to be the case. In which case, if the people that are born over here that believe something different than the people born over here, these ones are saying those ones are going to hell, and these ones are saying those ones are going to hell, we're not getting anywhere. So let's have some intelligent discussion about this. If there are places where science appears to disagree with theology, maybe it's a good time to look to see if maybe there are some alternate ways of explaining whatever an authority figure said, okay? And I found that in most cases, it's quite doable. It's not very difficult to say, maybe we don't have to throw away all of theology. Maybe we can actually just look at the way that we've been looking at it and then turn it a little bit and say, oh, I was reading that upside down. I was reading that a little wrong, or this word has several different meanings or translations, and I don't have to throw away theology, and I also don't have to throw away science, that these don't have to fight each other. And it's not difficult to find those, although whenever you seem to do that in religion, the religious authorities, the authority figures, will sometimes get mad at you because you've come to a different conclusion than them. So that's the first thing I'll say, is that this argument between theology and science, where we're butting heads, if people will be a little bit more flexible and not just utilize appeal to authority, you might find that they actually do a little bit more of this if you work with it a little bit. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is that there actually is a limit to what science can do. Science is limited by things like the microscope. If we don't have a good enough instrument for measuring data, or we are incapable of measuring data because our instruments are limited, then science is limited. And it just so happens that where theology begins, science kind of ends in many respects. In some respects, depending on what you're going by, that's not the case. So much of religion is archaeological in nature. and all the people involved with it are dead. It's really difficult to get witnesses. We have written down witnesses. They could be mistakes, and there's different witnesses in different religions that some of them don't seem plausible. We don't know. It goes beyond the scope of science. We don't know what's possible, and quite frankly, we're only looking at a very portion of human history, and we don't know what all has existed on the earth forever. But we can say, well, because this is the way that it's been for this period of time, as far as you can tell, this is the way it's always been. We don't know that. Okay, we're making a lot of assumptions here in many cases when we throw out historical witnesses or documents. But either way, it in many cases, religion is beyond what science is capable of examining and looking at and testing. And in those instances where science does not have instruments that enable us to verify whether something is legitimate or not, this is kind of in this area that is outside of the scope of the scientific method. And it's not that this is an unimportant space. This is a very important space. In fact, this is where the most important questions are possibly asked. Things like, what's the purpose of life? And, what is the origin of the universe, or the origin of, or the end of the universe, or, these kinds of questions that science tries to explain. We come up with the best things we can. Well, where did that come from? Where did that come from? And eventually gets to something, well, I don't know where it came from. And it doesn't mean those questions aren't important. They are very important questions, it's just that we can't answer them because we don't have good enough instruments to measure it. And so this is where theology can be helpful. Now, here's the thing, though, is you have to recognize that just because something is not scientific, let's say a thing is not scientific, doesn't mean that it's not important, or that the answers that we give, if we can't evaluate them scientifically, that those answers that we give are automatically invalid, that they're not of any use. But it gets really tricky. We can really get on some slippery ground here. And I think that it can become almost dangerous for people when they start going too far outside of the realm of what's objectively observable, because you can start getting into psychosis and falling prey to conditions of the human mind that are involved with delusion and things of that nature. So, and as a psychiatrist, I'm familiar with this field a bit, and it is a hairy space that we're working with.